What's an open secret people don't talk about? Story 1. The province of New Brunswick, Canada, is basically the play toy of a small handful of wealthy families, Irving, McCain, Oland. The government is just there for show. I remember reading a stat a number of years ago that about 65% of the population of New Brunswick was directly employed by those three families, and something like 80% was indirectly employed. Good one. I just googled this, and Irving owns like 200 companies in New Brunswick. That's insane. It just can't be a level playing field when you have a company that accounts for over half your economy. The story I always like to tell is how I used to work at a gas station as a pump attendant in the late 90s. We used to have this customer come in and just be a nasty, rude piece of crap to everyone. After about a month or so of this, he just stopped coming in. Turns out the Irving private security, dudes looked like Secret Service agents, paid a visit to him at his home, and he stopped coming in. Now, we were all happy about it because it was a huge pain in the ass having to deal with this guy all the time, but the thought that has always remained with me is how Irving's security was able to track a private citizen down and show up at their home with zero repercussions, backlash, etc. As much of a pain as he was, it still seemed unethical. Of course, there are bigger issues, property taxes skyrocketing in Canada's poorest province for everything but Irving-owned properties being the biggest bee in the bonnet for a lot of folks. Oh, and the mysterious brain disease that the government keeps shutting down research on, with the popular speculation being that it has something to do with Irving Ventures with chemicals/pesticides, etc. Oh, and the buying up of crown lands for logging at ridiculous reduced prices, and Irving buying all the news publication agencies and radio stations in the province. And, well, you get the idea. Born and raised in New Brunswick, can confirm. My favorite was that a couple of months ago, someone made stickers with Irving's logo, but instead of the Irving name, it said, "Obey your oligarchs." It was really funny. NB has a lot of lore, and crappier healthcare than most of the places our refugees come from. Some wild things happen here. Hopefully, you benefit from nepotism because everyone knows everyone. I'm from Quispamsis, just outside St. John, but moved away after graduating from university to be a journalist in Toronto. I bring this up every chance I get. They've made my province into a freaking poor, incompetent, backward banana republic. But they've given people just enough in the Irving Nature Park and scholarships and other BS costing a percentage of their annual revenue that people think they're the second coming of Christ. I can't count the number of times someone has told me if it wasn't for the Irvings, we wouldn't have any industry. No, New Brunswick is resource rich and one of the first eastern seaboard deepwater ports. If it wasn't for the Irvings, we'd have 60 other smaller companies in their place, all paying taxes instead of offshoring all their revenue in Bermuda. Irving is the biggest employer and through their subsidiaries probably employs more than half of the province in the private sector. At their height, they owned the shipbuilding, forestry, pulp and paper, oil and gas station, industrial transportation, basically all transport trucks, industrial construction, concrete, consumer food industries, and every single newspaper except for one. I'm probably missing several more too. New Brunswick is a beautiful place with incredible culture and amazing people, except the ignorant racist hicks. But you get those in every province, and yes, it's Canada's poorest province because of those corrupt, oil-soaked, blue-blooded bastards. Story 2. Steroid use in Hollywood. Everyone knows it's happening, but I don't think the extent is widely known. When a male actor puts on a lot of muscle for a role, they have most likely used steroids. Even if they have just put on a little muscle, they probably still used steroids. Because you can't gain fast enough to get in shape for the start of filming, and because it is technically illegal, no one will ever admit it. What makes it worse is these people and their trainers will write articles for Men's Health where they go through their workouts, ignoring the fact that they took growth hormones for a year. There have been a few good documentaries about doping in sports, but I think we need one about Hollywood. I watched Die Hard for the first time last Christmas. I know, and was struck by how Bruce Willis's body in that film worked, and still works so well as an action movie strong guy who goes to the gym type body. If it was shot today, it feels like there would be so much more pressure to be a dehydrated, roided up dude with a 10-pack. Kurt Russell in Big Trouble in Little China and Escape from New York also. I mean, he was obviously in good shape, but it looked natural. I miss the days of our action heroes still looking like humans. What's interesting is that we've seen this transformation occur all within the same actor and character, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Look at his physique in the first X-Men movie, and look at it now. My husband is into fitness and follows bodybuilders, has one of his bachelor's degrees in exercise science, and has a number of friends who use steroids. He told me some of the telltale signs, and now he and I play Who's Juiced while watching movies or sharing social media posts back and forth. I think it's incredibly unfair that stars aren't honest about being on something, just like those on Ozempic and/or surgeons' tables saying they keep fit by hiking in the Hollywood Hills and chasing their toddler around. These celebrities are showing unattainable bodies, saying, "Just eat clean and hit the gym every day." False. I don't remember who it was, but some ripped celebrity was talking about shirtless scenes and how dehydrated he has to be for them. Basically, he avoids water for 2 days and shoots, then hydrates, and they have to give him a few days before he does it again. He has to get as close to organ failure/death as possible to show an impossible aesthetic. I am open to anyone who asks. I've taken Ozempic and had Botox, now Daxify, for years. I don't look like a celebrity, but if anyone asks, I'm an open book. There are really only a couple of action/superhero actors I could think of off the top of my head that I would say are natty, or at least have natty achievable physiques. But I think people should also remember that steroids or not, there are a ton of camera/lighting tricks used to make them look even better. Joe Manganiello explained in his workout book what he does to prep for photo shoots or shirtless scenes, and even admitted that he doesn't look nearly that impressive in person. I think steroid use among young, healthy men is far more rampant than most people imagine. I've seen both the gym culture on steroids change and the availability of steroids increase. Basically, 99% of gym bros on social media are using gear, and kids base their goals on social media. Young men spend a year at the gym and see little to no change, then look at a fellow gym bro and see him having insane gains due to steroids, and they start using gear too. I think we're going to start seeing an increase in deaths and health-related issues in young, otherwise healthy men, and its cause is going to be from steroids. I took a kid's ID at the watershed and genuinely had to stop and say something. The kid in 3 years went from a skater-looking kid at 19 to a 38-year-old HGH caveman. He was beet red like the Liver King and huffing and puffing. It was gnarly, man. I feel like the only time our society cares about performance-enhancing drugs use is when it gives players an edge in competitive activities like sports, theatrical wrestling, or bodybuilding. It's rife in Hollywood, but also in the modeling industry. I used to date an aspiring model, and holy crap, do those people rely on roids and speed, depending on whether they're bulking or cutting. I've also heard some harrowing tales about the corn industry and life-shortening drugs the male performers take to stay rock hard for extended shoots. That's all I can think of right now, but it's still a lot. In bodybuilding, some leagues just don't test for steroids anymore. So you have the steroid league and the natural league, with natural just meaning you have to be more careful with your steroid use. These Hollywood celebs will be getting the best stuff and medical supervision, so they will be fine. But as you say, the lower tiers of modeling, for example, will probably be putting themselves at risk. Story 3. The way old folks are treated in care homes. There is a lot that could be exposed about the elderly and end-of-life issues, making the enormous monthly cost of a nursing home, over $10K for a shared room, or assisted living, over $6K, known for what those places are really like to live in. The estate planning industry popped up in the US to help people hide assets from the government, so that Medicaid would pay but not take the house. The push to integrate mentally ill seniors with the rest of the population and the impact that has on the other residents, seniors avoiding marriage to keep old pensions, etc., the entire hospice industry, and how they aren't going to be there to help at all unless there's an emergency. I could go on. Not to mention the fact that venture capitalists are gobbling them up. Fewer and fewer companies are now running these places into the ground with profit over care in order to continue squeezing out record profits year in and year out. I will never ever let me and my husband's parents end up in a home unless it's absolutely necessary for medical reasons. Even then, we would both do absolutely anything we could to have them living in our house and hire in-home care. The sad thing is, you say that now, but there are many circumstances and expenses that aren't planned for. And even if they are, they're hard to manage. And it's just like childcare. It's expensive as hell, both at senior care facilities and at home. Stressful as hell, and very time and energy consuming, which is the reason people end up doing it. It's the best and only option. It's very difficult to care for yourself these days, much less someone aging and immobile, or slightly/very dementia-ridden or frail, or has special dietary and medical needs or a myriad of other age-related ailments. And that's not even mentioning their personalities and personal financial issues that they've been carrying with them that fall into your lap as a caregiver. It's definitely easier said than done. My family and I took care of my grandmother for 2 years after she was diagnosed with dementia. It was hard to deal with that at the start, but as her dementia worsened, it became a total nightmare. Everyone in the household was worn out. It might sound bad, but when she finally passed, we were all much more relieved than we were sad. The only reason we didn't place her into a home is because they're about $10,000 a month on average in our state. The amount of hell I went through to keep a beloved parent out of there, we spent so much time and money to replicate the services as best as we could at home. But it took a toll. I just couldn't do it to them. They were such a good parent to me. It was heartbreaking to smell the urine and see the patients snowed in, which is doped to be complacent. I went through a similar hell, had to fight post-hospital discharge to get Mom returned to base level. All the system wanted to do was leave her to rot in bed, not even properly washed. I nearly had a nervous breakdown, was threatened with safeguarding for doing the right thing, threatened with Mom being removed, false allegations, etc. Thankfully, a physio, OT, and district nurse fought my corner. I no longer have domiciliary carers, I do it all myself. Mom is active, consistent, clean, and happy. I'm not doing so great, honestly, but I'm glad that I can be here for her, to care for her as she cared for me. I will have no regrets. My dad was in a few of these for rehab after back surgery complications, and holy crap, it's absolutely horrifying. He broke his leg at one point and had rods sticking out of it holding it together, and they were supposed to clean it daily to prevent infection. Right in front of me, this woman comes huffing and puffing in after being asked to do her job for literally hours and begins cleaning it so freaking aggressively, like she was taking her frustration out on him. She was even twisting his leg as he yelled in pain despite being told that his leg was barely held together currently. I had to yell at her to be gentle and nearly ended up pushing her off of him to do it myself. So I can't imagine what goes on when family members aren't watching them like hawks like I tried to do. I worked for a time for a single doctor podiatry practice in Florida, and the majority of patients were from assisted living and memory care facilities. Some were basically senior apartment complexes where the residents were still mostly independent, and some were full-on care, or supposed to be. Coordinating with facilities, processing paperwork, and handling insurance all gave me a front row seat to what the hell is up with those places. It's really depressing. Whenever someone lost their insurance or Medicare/Medicaid, she'd agree to see them for the price of their copay as a cash visit. Many of them still couldn't afford that and had to go without care. In before someone's like, who cares if they don't get seen by a podiatrist? A lot of them had diabetes. Also, with how the quality of care is in a lot of those places, that's the only time many of them would get their... The ones who were more independent made me kinda sad sometimes too, because I could tell the ones whose families never called them, when I would ring for an appointment reminder, they'd keep me on the phone talking about who knows what, like they hadn't had a conversation in days. It was never great care at these places, but with private equity and giant corporations buying them up, it's just getting worse, while also getting more expensive. Story 4. The Mormon Church is sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in stock and real estate. They do almost no charity work directly from those funds. The majority of the humanitarian funds the church claims are from an equivalent dollar value of labor from their members and another entirely separate charity arm that doesn't involve church contributions. It's estimated that the church is valued at $250 billion. They use the money to buy malls, warehouses, hotels, and more recently apartment/condo complexes. I forget off the top of my head which. I think they own a lot of Florida, and the funny thing is they've convinced their members that they're poor and they no longer pay for cleaners for their church buildings. The congregation cleans the buildings for free. My husband's family was Mormon. When they send their kids on their trips or whatever, I can't remember what they're called. They aren't provided food or anything, unless it's volunteered by someone from the church. They have members of the church do a rotating volunteering for who makes them every meal. This is obviously an issue in smaller towns like my hometown, and they often go on starving for several days. It's really sad, and the churches don't care. They're called missions, and yes, members pay a fixed amount monthly to the church, and the church turns that around to missionaries in their respective areas with different amounts based on costs of living. That cost of living assumes that local members and others will feed the missionaries some of the time. They're not supposed to have any other funds available to them, but I know many do. Missionaries often go without. Story 5. There's an industry that basically takes guardianship of elderly people by getting them declared incompetent without their knowledge. They move them into nursing homes, sell off their homes and assets, and take over their money. It's like the title theft scam, but with people being taken over rather than just real estate. It's brutal and frightening. This is my greatest fear. Medical bureaucracy is terrifying. I don't have kids to advocate for me either. Years ago, I was stripped of all my rights and sent to inpatient after just going to a therapist intake. I moved and just wanted to see a therapist closer to my new apartment. I wasn't having the best time, but I was nowhere near suicidal. This lady just decided I was a danger to myself because I was honest that I did try when I was a child, over 20 years ago, as a direct result of brutal traumatic events. I was in there for 2 days, and if I didn't have a supportive family, or that time off of work already, I shudder to think of the long-term implications. It cost me over $5,000, and I would have been fired if I just called and no shown up for 2 days. It truly would have ruined my life if I didn't have a family with access to that kind of money. It still took me years to be able to pay them back. One person making one call can ruin your life. I still have nightmares. I live in Vegas, where this article is highlighted, and I'm absolutely freaking disgusted. My mom is 60, and this terrifies the crap out of me because my mom has CPTSD and has had very agitated or aggressive moments from being triggered, but she's overall stable and cognitive. This scares the hell out of me beyond what I can express. And that piece of crap judge who greenlit it all is now working with CPS and kids in their care. I got an 11-year-old. That makes me want to vomit. Nothing about this should be legal. Those people should be in cuffs and suffering for these crimes because they are freaking crimes, even if it's legal. I watched a documentary on this. There was a really sad case where a guy was dying of cancer at the age of 65 and miraculously got better. They had sold off his house and his rare collections of his prized Corvettes to their pals for pennies. We're talking $300,000 cars being sold for $3,000. It was heartbreaking watching his story. It's an unspoken crime. He's currently stuck in an old age home because he has no money, assets, or power to change anything because they gave some corrupt guy the power of attorney. Wow. As a CNA for 2 years, I did notice something was off. I noticed very similar patterns. All these patients were cared for by the same person. They were all conserved, and many of them were sane and didn't want to take meds. I heard stories where many of them didn't know why they were there, since many of them were homeless. I had a feeling they were essentially being exploited by the state, so everyone would get paid. The SNF, the doctors, etc. Even though they were perfectly fine to be out in the world, I wouldn't doubt if some of them were like those in this article. That's why I'm very fearful of growing old in this state. There was an episode on this in the Netflix series Dirty Money, being familiar with guardianships after Britney Spears. I thought it was so well done and truly horrifying how it was targeting so many elderly people who appeared very competent. I just googled and the wiki page says that episode was removed due to a lawsuit. So who knows what happened there. but it was really well done, I thought. Story 6. I'd love to see a documentary on the PPP loan fraud during COVID. US. There have been a lot of news articles about it, but a deep dive that exposes wealthy people would be awesome. Heh, I worked remotely before COVID. My job wasn't impacted. I actually had more work than before. I qualified for like $150K to use on my payroll for tranche 1, and like $70 for number 2. Since it was first come first serve, since it seemed too good to be true, and since I've never in my life taken any government assistance or used anything like that, I decided not to. Figured it best suited for folks whose company legally was stopped, like my favorite diner. Well, let me tell you, I have friends who made it out big. They had a few companies that used and had to spend some cash on payroll. They were getting anywhere from my same $150K to $500 to $700 plus. They were in the same boat as me, worked before the pandemic and worked more during the pandemic. They did everything by the book. The difference is that their normal paycheck was replaced by the PPP, as it was essentially outlined. That meant their normal paycheck accumulated, wasn't spent. Well, a couple of them turned around and bought some real estate. I had friends begging me to take the PPP. Never did. Well, a joke on me, they've all got property now worth over $1 million from $400K-ish during 2020, and I've taken a new job and a pay cut post-pandemic. At least my interest rates are still low. What folks don't get is it was essentially just free money. You couldn't cash the check and buy a boat, but if your business wasn't impacted, you could cash the check. Replace employee payroll with that money, and all of a sudden you've got a great and hugely profitable year. The record profits that Trump loves to brag about, the highest ever in US history, are really that profit was an easy, legal withdrawal, and no rules were broken. The idiots they're going after now just essentially took up the check into a dealership and bought themselves whatever. Worked for a smaller company that took a PPP loan. The business was deemed essential and not shut down. In fact, busier than ever. Proceeded to fire 3 more people, making me take on all of those roles. The owner later bought a new house and an $80,000 pickup truck. My mental health destroyed from the excess workload. I made $17 an hour and was not eligible for unemployment. Luckily, in the Netherlands, the PPP fraud was so blatantly obvious that the whole country knows which guy did it, and everyone hates him, and he lost it all in court. His name is Siewert van Linden, and he was a political pundit. At the beginning of COVID, he claimed to have started a charity to get PPP for the country. Due to his fame, a lot of people and companies helped him for free. Turns out the state was paying him for the PPP. And while he claims to be innocent, there is literally a tale of him and his companions saying things like, "We're going to screw the ministry and Dutch government so hard and become so bloody rich. Ha 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 ha." I started a physical/cybersecurity company right before COVID hit. It took almost all of my savings to get off the ground and a small client base, which was quickly demolished by the pandemic. I got a PPP loan to help offset this, but still ended up like $3K in the hole. I decided to look at the public records for the loans and never realized that my town of around 15,000 people had that many barbershops or small businesses. Not saying they were all frauds, but I know for a fact some of my friends/acquaintances who were on those lists never started their own businesses. Brittany Dawn is an ex-fitness influencer who stopped fitness and pivoted to Christian stuff everywhere. She had been out of fitness for years and got a full PPP loan for her fitness business. Texas went after her because she earned $1+ million and didn't actually deliver some, didn't customize any, and didn't respond to people's emails about the individual coaching they paid for. So she got a PPP loan for a business she hadn't run in years, then held a GoFundMe for a homeless man and got $25K plus, then didn't give it to him as he went to a free rehab center. Story 7. How some of the top fashion magazines send young models over to meet wealthy donors in hotel rooms who will help them get the modeling contract they were after. Many years ago, I was 20, living and working/modeling OS, and was sent to a hotel to meet a director of a huge TVC campaign I had just booked that was earning me $200,000. It was being shot on some gorgeous islands on boats, etc. It was my first really big job. I was very excited. The director sat in a booth of this boutique hotel and asked for my modeling portfolio and flipped through each page, telling me why I was right for the job. By halfway through the folio, he started explaining what each photo made him want to do to me. I knew I had 10 days on location with this 60-year-old creep. I was trapped though. I managed to let on I was willing to leave the darker bar area where we were sitting to have a more private conversation about the job. As soon as I could see the foyer, I went to make a run for it. He grabbed my arm with this, "No, no, no, you don't," pushed me into a corner and rammed his revolting tongue down my throat. I kicked him as hard as I could in the balls and made a run for it. By the time I got back to the model apartment, I had already been canceled for the job, obviously, and within the hour my agent was there abusing the living crap out of me. Not some crappy small-time agency, but this was a respected, world-renowned one. She was apoplectic. Did I know how much the job was worth? How much this was earning her? Don't I know how the industry works? I explained to her what happened, but she acted like I was the one who was an idiot for not getting it. At 1 a.m., I was kicked out of the house and was living in a foreign country. A little over a year later, I was living in a model house with 8 other girls. I was the only one who hadn't been drugged, raped, sexually assaulted, etc. Another city was full of girls, warning that lower-grade agents would take your passport to make a copy, but actually keep your passports and force you to stay and work gentlemen's clubs. This was common knowledge and girls were constantly being trapped. For another job, I was sent home for refusing to take all of my clothes off for the owner of the company. He yelled at me saying, "You know I can get some Russian slut to do this for free." Again, I just left. I have a dozen stories like this. Life might seem glamorous if you're a top name, but I was earning a very comfortable living. It took me standing up for myself unrelentingly, being on at every moment, never really socializing, walking out and running for my life more than I care to admit. I've actually seen something like this with my own eyes. A batch of young models from South America and Eastern Europe were brought to Paris a few weeks before a certain event, and there was a huge party where the girls were meant to meet important people in the industry to be noticed and help them form connections, contracts, agents, etc. But basically it was a bunch of adults getting 16 to 17-year-old girls drunk or on drugs, and the rest is evident. It took me years to realize how creepy it was. The entire fashion industry is based on producing imagery that fetishizes different aspects of a woman's body. Young women and girls are sexualized in the most extreme manner. The glamour and associated privileges lavished upon top models are merely bait for the predators. It is not just the sexual deviants that play a role in this. The peril to which we expose our daughters when we sell them this dream of success spills over to all women. This documentary should be made so we can internalize this fact. Too lazy to look it up, but like last year, the FAA database was glitched or something, and the issue was that the program it ran on was no longer being taught, so they had to get an old dude who was an expert on the coding language used. And I read a lot of comments saying how he probably got paid a lot of money for a simple fix. Story 8. The age of all of the tech that is the backbone of our whole world. What you as the consumer or any frontline employee are interacting with is usually just a GUI overlay or a program that is manipulating something much, much older. The worst tends to be the government, certain sectors in aviation and transit and banking. Also, people don't know that one company that completely flies under the radar and has no real oversight owns a very large portion of the software and has their fingers in a huge amount of financial and retail transactions. Sticking modern paint jobs on 20-year-old systems is the bread and butter of what I do for a living. Nobody wants to build anything new except startups and massive organizations. Everything in the middle is decades of band-aids and lipstick on something some startup built and sold forever ago. The college I graduated from still teaches COBOL. You can name your salary coming out of college if you're savvy enough, but then you're stuck coding COBOL the rest of your life. It's a really niche area of tech and controls the majority of the American banking and financial system. I used to work for said company as a systems engineer, assuming we're talking about the same one. It processes nearly all of the financial transactions that occur via card or check and creates/mails out nearly every credit and debit card. They also process all of the IRS payments and transactions. I can 100% confirm their backend is old as hell, COBOL and .NET. An issue while I was there was that they couldn't find enough experienced COBOL developers. As a result, some bugs were going unfixed or half-assed. Although the monitoring was pretty top-notch, I spent a considerable amount of time working on implementing that. It's truly scary stuff. They reminded me of E-Corp to a good degree. I didn't go into the whole tech stack for what should be the obvious reasons. It's all old as hell, like the late 90s and early 2000s old was the most up-to-date stuff, which aren't the oldest things in the world by any means. As others have mentioned, some critical infrastructure is still running on late 80s crap, but that doesn't discount that a huge payment processing infrastructure is running on old tech that isn't updated or maintained to any appreciable degree. A lot of knowledgeable folks were retiring when I left, and there was a failing scramble to find people to replace them. Also, I'm not mentioning the company for my own personal privacy, as well as a very long-lived NDA. Story 9. Larium/mefloquine. There's a mini YouTube documentary about it, but it's not nearly big enough or seen by enough people for me to count that. If you don't know, Larium is an anti-malaria drug that was prescribed to many people in the late 80s and 90s and prescribed by first world militaries up to the 2010s. I personally have family who were impacted and still suffer from the effects of Larium, but the people I know at least didn't have their brains and lives completely destroyed by it, like so many others have. It's been linked to countless suicides and homicides, including the Kandahar massacre, causing paranoia, hallucinations, and night terrors that literally take your worst fears and bring them to life, because the mefloquine toxicity acts on the limbic system, where your amygdala, aka the fear center, is. Many people have killed themselves over the dreams alone. Every single detainee at GTMO was dosed, for no reason, with the 1250 mg dose that would be prescribed to cure someone who had malaria, not even the 250 mg prophylactic dose. This was done without testing the detainees for malaria and without reason to believe they had it. People from the same regions as the prisoners who were at GTMO as employees were not subjected to it, and it's widely believed to have been done specifically to bring out the debilitating side effects of psychological waterboarding. There is evidence, though not proof, that Larium may have been created as part of MKUltra, when the CIA was trying to synthesize mind control drugs using quinolones. Currently, there are still class action lawsuits in progress in the US and Europe over the military's mass prescribing this as the drug of choice to prevent malaria, even though there have been much safer and equally effective options since the 90s. Google it. You might fall down the rabbit hole like I have many times after seeing how it affects my family members who took it. It's terrifying how much awful crap is linked to. I took mefloquine for several months while in Haiti. At first, the dreams were psychedelic. Then you'd be standing in the middle of a room and you would be absolutely certain, as though it was happening to you right then, that the ceiling would cave in and you would be crushed under the concrete. Like a waking dream you can't wake up from. Or I'd suddenly remember the fish I had for lunch and become convinced that I had swallowed a bone, that I could literally feel it lodged in my throat, that I couldn't breathe. Then the panic sets in and you actually can't breathe. It's almost impossible to describe, except you see it happening to you in your mind's eye, like you're dreaming. But you are standing there and your body is reacting like it's happening to you right then, and your brain fuses the two things, dream and reality. Yeah, I stopped the mefloquine. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and please don't forget to subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again and see you next time.